Summer's finally arrived, and many of you are probably planning a seaside escape. And if you live in the Carolinas, chances are you're hoping to head out to the Outer Banks of North Carolina for a little rest and relaxation. And if you do, well, I highly recommend you go see The Lost Colony, the outdoor drama that draws thousands of tourists each year. Now here on the site of the original Lost Colony on Roanoke Island, we've been running the show for 30 years, since 1937. It details Sir Walter Raleigh's efforts to start a permanent settlement way back in the 16th century, even before Jamestown and Plymouth. Well, I won't tell you what happens, but most folks know the history of how it ends. But if you don't, well, you just hightailed out here to see the play. Now, I heard that 1967 is going to be the summer of love. But if you're less inclined to join the hippies out there in San Francisco, well, you bring your family over here to Roanoke Island, and I think you'll find that we're just as welcoming as they are.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Are you ready for today?
Yes, I'm excited.
Good. Okay, so my sources for today's episode are from a book called The Lost Colony Murder on the Outer Banks, Seeking Justice for Brenda Joyce Holland by John Rayleigh.
Okay.
That's where the bulk of my information came from. And I also watched a couple of YouTube videos, which will be linked in our show notes.
Okay.
You're listening to Hard Times and True Crimes. Okay, well, summer's here. Yay.
Yes.
And so I'm sure everyone's getting ready for their vacations, and most people are probably planning a trip to the beach.
Yep.
At some point. And so our episode today takes place on the Outer Banks.
Okay. I went there last year.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
I love the Outer Banks.
Me too.
I haven't been in a long time. Okay, so let's just dive right in. On a hot, muggy day in July, the 6th to be exact, Dare County Sheriff Frank Cahoon in Manteo, North Carolina, received the call he had been dreading and hoping for, both at the same time. The body of missing 19-year-old Brenda Joyce Holland had been found in the Albemarle Sound in shallow water among tree roots and stumps. Mm. It appeared she had been strangled. Brenda had not been seen since July 1st, and while it was everyone's hope that she would be found alive, after this many days, hope was beginning to dim a little bit.
Yeah.
And now the dreaded outcome had materialized. Brenda Holland was not an insider on the Outer Banks Island, but was a summer intern at the well-known outdoor theater production of the outdoor drama, The Lost Colony.
I have pictures of when we went last year of the outdoor colony that I'll give you for the
Yay,
episode.
perfect.
I have where they found her body.
She had arrived on Roanoke Island in the small community of Manteo just 1 month before from another small community in the North Carolina mountains near Canton. After completing her sophomore year at Campbell College, which is now Campbell University.
Right.
Which is about halfway between her hometown in the mountains and then her new summer gig. She headed off on her trek from the mountains to the sea. This was an exciting time in the life of a college student, making plans for her future. She was spreading her wings.
Yeah.
Brenda had been born second in a family of 4 children. Her older sister, Anne, had already married, and Brenda was the oldest at home, helping at times to take care of her younger brother and sister, Charles and Kim. Her parents, Charles Shotgun Holland and Geraldine Jerry Holland, had married.
I love that name.
Geraldine?
Yes.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I love it.
Had married just before Shotgun had left to serve in World War II. Her father was slight of stature, but with a big temper that was only fueled by his hard drinking.
Okay.
In fact,
Shotgun. That's
you
kind
just
of indicative
nailed it.
of that.
Yep. His nickname of Shotgun had been earned by his explosive behavior.
Okay.
You nailed that one. The Holland family had their trials, like any family does. Shotgun was haunted by memories of the war. He most likely had PTSD. And that added to his drinking. And at times, he became physically violent with Jerry in front of the kids.
Okay. And that would have been World War II?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sometimes he punished the kids harshly as well, but no one who knew them would deny that he loved his children dearly and he would kill for them. As Brenda entered high school, others would describe her as bubbly, friendly, a joy to be around. Should I dare say it?
She lit up a room.
She lit up a room. Yeah, that is a true statement, though. In fact, she was voted Miss Congeniality in a beauty contest in her hometown.
Okay.
So she truly did.
Right, light up a room.
Brenda was a pretty girl, by all accounts. She was 5 feet 7 inches, thin, with dark hair and brown eyes. She had a slight gap between her front teeth that was just enough to add to her appearance, not take away from it.
Okay. So was she an actress?
She was not an actress. She
Okay.
was going there to be a makeup supervisor.
Oh, cool.
And I will talk a little bit about how she got into that, too.
Okay.
As she neared the end of her high school years and began to think about college, their family doctor, Hugh Matthews, influenced her decision to attend Campbell College. Her parents were divided on the issue. Her mother, she didn't really see a need for Brenda to attend college, and she was kind of worried about her going that far away.
Right.
So Campbell College is in Bowie's Creek, and that's only about a 4-hour drive from where they lived.
Right.
So that doesn't seem that far to us. But I guess if your child's moving away to college, that seems far away.
Oh, yeah.
On the other hand, Shotgun was for it. He wanted her to go. And Brenda, she was ready to escape her little small hometown. So the decision was made. And it was helped along by the fact that their doctor, Dr. Matthews, he actually helped with the tuition.
Oh, wow.
And he introduced her to some of his friends out in that area as well. So Brenda, to answer your question from before, she was part of the theater group at Campbell. She had gotten into theater.
Okay.
And it had given her a real thirst for drama. But she was more into like the costuming and the makeup. And that's why she pursued the summer internship at the Lost Colony. So she was going there to be a makeup supervisor.
Gotcha.
But she did have to convince her parents to go along with that idea because that was further than the college that she was attending. Her mother really wanted her home for that summer, but she reluctantly went along with it. And she was going to rent a room. And so I think that probably wasn't, like you're just renting a room out of a house. And the people who rent to college students, her rent probably wasn't extravagant or anything like that.
Like a boarding house kind of? Okay.
So she was renting the room at the home of Dick and Cora Twyford, and they were island residents. Cora and her daughters actually also played bit parts in the Lost Colony drama.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people on the island did. A lot of the families and stuff, they were all like the bit part players.
Probably back then especially. I mean, I think it's still a big deal, but probably back then that was a very big deal for the town.
Absolutely. After Brenda was settled in at the Twyfords, she quickly assimilated into life on Roanoke Island, meeting new friends, getting to know her roommate, and hanging out with the cast of the show. She would get rides to work with her boss, named Renee Raines. That was a nickname for Irene.
Okay,
They call her
Renee.
Renee. Mm-hmm.
That's cute.
That is cute. And sometimes she would actually end up confiding in Renee, and like that was like kind of like a mentor for her. She had recently dyed her dark hair blonde, and she was enjoying sunning on the beach when she was not working at the theater. And she had dated a few guys since she had arrived.
Yeah.
Life was really looking good for Brenda until she went missing. We had said she was found on July the 6th.
Right.
But she actually went missing on the 1st. So
Okay.
that was a period of about 5 days. The previous evening, June the 30th, before she was last seen, she had gone on a date with a fellow cast member by the name of Danny Barber. With his short dark hair, tenor voice, and smooth confidence, I'm sure he was popular with the ladies. He also shared a rooming house with 2 roommates, and sometimes they would host parties there, and sometimes Brenda had attended those parties.
Okay. Typical young folks.
So on June the 30th, after that night's performance, Brenda and Danny were seen leaving the theater together for their date. However, at the next evening's performance, Brenda did not show up for work. Cora Twyford, the landlady whom Brenda was renting from, who was also in the show, she mentioned to Renee Raines, that was the show's matriarch that I've already established.
Okay.
She mentioned, Brenda had not returned home from her date the night before. It was unusual for Brenda. She was not a wild girl.
Right.
She was not the sort to stay out all night. So Renee reported Brenda's absence to the play's general manager, John Fox. By the time intermission rolled around, everyone on the cast and crew were starting to become concerned. And knowing they had gone on a date the night before, Fox approached Danny Barber and he asked him, when was the last time you saw Brenda? Danny replied he had dropped her off at her house at 2:00 in the morning the night before, or that, early morning hours before. Well, Brenda's landlady, Cora Twyford, she overheard that conversation and she quickly spoke up. And she said, "That's not true, Danny. Brenda didn't come home last night."
Oh.
So she quickly pointed that out. And Danny quickly changed his response to match. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. We went up to my room after our night out, and I fell asleep on the bed. And when I woke up, she was gone, so I just assumed she had walked home." Which sounds a little callous, if nothing else. Like, really? You're going to fall asleep and not take your date home?
Right. Yes. A little bit sus.
Yeah, especially since he had lied to begin with.
Right.
At that point, Renee told Fox to call and check with a guy by the name of Rob Breeze. Now, Breeze was another guy Brenda had recently dated, and Brenda had confided to Renee that the date had not gone well, their last date. In fact, Brenda had been actively avoiding him since that date. She indicated that she was feeling pressured, quote unquote, by Breeze. And I think she meant pressured for sex.
Right.
And she didn't want to see him anymore. John Fox did contact Breeze, and when they spoke, he seemed alarmed and said he had not seen Brenda in over a week. So at 9:20 that evening, John Fox, feeling very uneasy, called authorities and reported Brenda missing. Okay. And then after the end of the performance that night, he actually went by the sheriff's department and dropped off one of the programs because it had Brenda's picture printed in it. Sheriff Frank Cahoon was contacted early the next morning by his office, and by 7:30 a.m., he was meeting with John Fox at the courthouse. After speaking with Fox, Sheriff Cahoon paid a visit to Danny Barber's home. He was the last person to have seen her, after all.
Okay.
Barber's roommate, Rodney Brett, answered the door and spoke to the sheriff before waking Barber, and then he went ahead and left for work. When Sheriff Cahoon spoke with Barber, he told the same story to the sheriff that he had given to John Fox about bringing Brenda back to his place, falling asleep on the bed, waking up to find her gone. Later, his explanation for changing that story that Cora Twyford had called him in was that he was afraid of Renee Raines because she kept close tabs on the boys and girls in the show, and he just didn't want her to know they had been out.
And back then, like
2 in the morning
together would have been a big...
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was his reason that he didn't tell.
Okay. I mean, that does...
That could have a ring of truth to it. He was soon allowed to leave, and the sheriff and John Fox agreed it was time to alert Brenda's parents that she had disappeared.
Oh.
That's got to be a hard job. They also organized a search of the route Brenda would have walked home from Barber's house, and they alerted reporters, hoping the publicity might garner some tips from anybody who could have seen her. The sheriff also made plans to follow up with Barber's 2 roommates, Rodney Brett, whom they had already spoken to briefly, and then Earl Meares. The sheriff did follow up with Brett. Brett said that on the evening in question, he had arrived home around 1 a.m. Shortly after going to bed, he heard Danny come in. He assumed at that point that Danny was alone because he heard no music, no talking, nothing like that. But then he heard a woman's voice in Danny's room. When he heard the noise of bed springs squeaking, he assumed Danny was sleeping with someone.
Oh, gosh.
And then Brett said he had fallen asleep and was awakened shortly by the noise of the front door opening and closing. He did not hear a car start. He then went back to sleep, and then he woke again around 7:45, 8-ish, and went to work as normal. As he left, he was fairly certain that he saw Danny's and Earl's cars both parked in the driveway in more or less the same place they always parked. He also did confide that he had a conversation with Danny shortly after Brenda's disappearance, and Danny had confided in him that, "You don't know it, but I had Brenda here at the house and in my room last night." And then Brett informed him he did know it because he had heard them.
Okay.
Brett then told authorities that he was nervous and he did not want to stay at the house any longer. And he didn't. He actually left and went to stay somewhere else after that. The other roommate, Earl Meares, was also spoken to. But he had actually gone out of town around the same time that Brenda disappeared to visit his girlfriend up in New Jersey. One newspaper article speculated that maybe Brenda had gone with him, but that turned out not to be the case. But his alibi did turn out to be solid and confirmed by his girlfriend. So he was really dismissed as a suspect early on.
So they were all kind of friends.
Well, they had just met. Earl was the one who, I guess, rented the house, and then he rented the 2 rooms to Rodney Brett, and Danny Barber. Mm-hmm. So, they were friends, but not like long friends.
Not super close.
They were roommate friends.
Gotcha. Well, I was saying Brenda, friends with them.
She had met them and hung out with them, yes.
Okay.
Like there were reports like when she would go to the house for parties and Rodney Brett would dance with her and the other girls. And they all just kind of,
so
teenagers hanging out.
Well, okay.
Mm-hmm. Even though Earl Meares was dismissed as a suspect, he actually figures into this case again a little bit later on.
Oh, okay.
In a minor way. Or maybe not so minor. The sheriff had been trying to get a hold of Brenda's parents, but to no avail. He couldn't get them on the phone after several attempts. The news had picked up the story about the missing girl. They were airing it on Sunday night. Brenda's older sister, Ann, happened to hear it on the car radio.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine?
No.
Of course, she was shaken up.
Right.
She and her husband, they drove over to the Canton Police Department to find out what was going on. And the deputy there said he had not realized it was Ann's sister that was missing. And he told her, well, we've been trying to get in touch with your parents and we can't get them. Ann informed them, well, they're up at the lake and they don't have a phone there.
Oh.
So he had to call the Haywood County authorities and they had to drive out to their little place at the lake to inform the parents.
Mm.
So that night, after Shotgun and Jerry had gone to bed, they were awakened by a knock on the door.
Every parent's worst nightmare.
Yep. Everybody knows a knock on the door after your sleeping hours is not going to be good news.
Mm.
Shotgun was informed that his daughter Brenda had been missing for 2 days at this point. He and Jerry and the younger kids packed up their stuff to head home immediately. They were going to leave the kids with their big sister Ann, and he and Jerry were headed to Manio to find their little girl.
Mm-hmm.
On that Monday morning, a search team started out, including some of the deputies and some of Brenda's fellow cast and crew members. Authorities also got another development in the case. A neighbor of Danny Barber's by the name of Robert Midget, he had something to share with the officers. On the night in question, at around 3 a.m., he had heard a car outside of his window that sounded like it was having car trouble. He also heard one of the other neighbors' dog growling and the voices of a man and woman outside. Shortly after that, he heard a woman's scream and then silence. And then a little later, he heard the car start up and leave.
Why do people not call the cops during these
Right. Like, I keep thinking, well, why would you not have questioned that? You hear a woman scream?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you go investigate that? Or at least, like you said, call?
Right. It happens all the time, though.
I know. This is weird, but like even now, because we do this and I'm always reading and listening to true crime, if I hear guns going off in my neighborhood after dark, I immediately look at the clock and make a note of the time and count how many shots I heard.
Really?
Just in case I have to give an interview with the police or report it.
That is so smart. I'm so like non-observant with details like that. Like if I got kidnapped, I would not be the one to like know my surroundings. I'd be like, I don't know what kind of car.
Well, if I was in a panic, I wouldn't either. But when I'm laying there and I hear like gunshots, well, I live in the county, so I hear gunshots frequently.
Sure.
But if it's the middle of the night, I'm like, oh, what time is it? How many shots did I hear?
That's really smart, actually.
So if you live in my neighborhood, I got your back. This same neighbor, Robert Midget, he also ran a local liquor store. And he also told authorities about a conversation he had heard with his sales manager and a local customer of his store. Now, the customer was George Washington King. The customer was a man by the name of George Washington King. He was a local black man in the area who was known to love to drink. Like, he was kind of like, your town drunk. Maybe like Otis on Mayberry.
Sure.
On Andy Griffith.
Yeah.
King said he had found a wallet while he was out on his lawn cutting tractor on Scarborough Town Road in Manio. Now, King was illiterate, so he saw the ID. He couldn't read the ID, but he showed it to the salesman, and the salesman realized that ID belonged to Brenda, the missing girl.
Oh.
And he advised him to take that to the sheriff because that girl was missing, and he needed to turn that in.
Yeah.
So a little later, after Robert Midget heard his salesman tell him that, he called the sheriff's department to see had George turned in the wallet and he had not. Of course, it didn't take long for the sheriff to go hunt down George King, right? This was the 1960s. It's in the South. You have a local drunk man who's also black, and he's got in his possession the wallet of a missing girl.
Yeah.
That seemed pretty fishy. But to the sheriff's credit, he didn't automatically assume guilt. He spoke with George King, and he actually determined fairly quickly that he was harmless and not involved. So he just wanted to pinpoint, George, where did you find the wallet? And it turns out he had found it about 2 miles from Barbara's house. Okay. And when they searched that area further, they also found a pocketbook with various cosmetics in it. Brenda's roommate did confirm that those items had belonged to Brenda.
Something happened in between that house and her
home. That's exactly right. And not only was George not held for further questioning, but he actually ended up making the headlines in the paper because he was the one who first helped make a break in the case.
Oh,
yeah. So it turned out good for him.
Yeah.
Soon the SBI arrived on the scene, as well as Brenda's parents. And as you can imagine, they're desperate to find their daughter, and Shotgun was ready to take whatever measures necessary to do so.
Oh, I bet.
He arrived in town with his knife, a gun, and drinking heavily.
Okay.
Not a good combination. So Shotgun was out for blood, looking for whoever knew any information about his daughter.
I bet.
And her parents were surprised when they saw her picture in the program because they did not even know she had cut and dyed her hair blonde.
Oh.
So that was a little bit of a shocker for them. Shotgun's asking everybody around town, and while the townsfolk usually would always gossip among themselves, like we all do, they were tight-lipped with outsiders. And so Shotgun, he didn't get anywhere with his questioning.
Really?
Mm-hmm,
you would think they would be like sympathetic.
Because he's the father, but yeah, they're just, they're very tight-lipped around outsiders.
Protective up there, okay.
Then came that Thursday morning, July the 6th. Something was spotted floating in the Albemarle Sound by a Civil Air Patrol searcher. He was in a small plane, and he was able to get close enough to determine it definitely was a body, and he radioed the sheriff. Once Sheriff Cahoon arrived, he had to get a neighbor on the Sound to take him to that spot by boat, and they were almost certain it was the missing girl. And seeing the body was not for the faint of heart.
I'm sure. After that many days.
I am going to describe that, so just be aware. She had several cuts and bruises on her face and neck. You could see her tongue poking out from clenched teeth. Her teeth also appeared to be loose, as if she had been struck in the mouth. The body, of course, was very bloated and decomposed at this point. Much of the hair on her scalp was gone due to decomposition.
Oh.
She was wearing a maroon skirt, which was pulled up to the waist and kind of turned inside out. She had on a leopard print sleeveless top garment, but no blouse and no shoes. That leopard print garment was like a teddy, or like if you can imagine a bodysuit.
Yeah.
So it's like a one piece, but it was sleeveless.
Okay.
And it was something you wear under your clothes.
Okay.
But the top blouse was nowhere to be seen. And you can just imagine the smell, considering she had been out there for days, as far as they knew, decomposing in the North Carolina heat and humidity in July.
Yeah.
The sheriff and his friend with the boat loaded her up and brought her back to shore, placed her in a body bag, and put her in the back of the car. The sheriff had Danny Barber brought down to identify Brenda instead of her parents. He was actually hoping for Danny to break and confess.
Oh, okay, so they were still really suspecting Danny at this point. Okay.
They were.
I'm glad they didn't have her parents identify her anyway.
Can you imagine seeing that would be very traumatic. But Danny did not confess. He was able to quickly identify her, and the sheriff thought, well, that's odd because she's very badly decomposed.
Yeah.
But Danny then pointed out a small silver necklace around her neck that was one of her prized possessions.
Okay.
And that was the one she had won back home in that Miss Congeniality, as Miss Congeniality in that beauty contest. So Danny said he knew it was her because of the necklace, which again makes sense.
Yeah, and I would think maybe by the clothes she was wearing if he was the last one to see her.
Yes. Brenda's body was then sent to the state medical examiner in Norfolk, Virginia. And so here are some further findings from the autopsy. The cause of death was ligature strangulation. There were contusions on her face, scalp, arms, chest, thighs, and ankles. The soft tissue of the nose was mostly gone. The body showed generalized skin slipping. Do you know what that is?
No.
That's part of the decomposition process in which the skin cells start to rupture and they form blisters, and it kind of leaves behind a sticky substance on the skin.
Oh, gosh, that doesn't sound good.
Right. And that, along with the hair loss, are part of early decomposition. There were also lacerations of the hymen and vagina.
Oh.
There was bruising and swelling around the labia.
She was probably raped.
They speculated that she might have been raped. However, what they couldn't reconcile with that theory is that her clothes were not torn away. She had on that one-piece teddy bodysuit, and it was not ripped off or torn.
Huh.
And so they even though they thought, well, that could have been rape, what rapist is going to take the time to put your clothes back on?
Yeah.
They felt it was improbable that that would have happened. So they didn't rule out rape, but they were thinking couldn't have been rape.
Okay, but had she had sex with Danny?
Well, we don't know
Okay.
yet. The roommate did say he heard that.
All right.
Keep listening. Well, of course, this horrible and vicious killing made waves through the Manio community. Things like that really didn't happen in this small town. It was a tourist town.
Yeah.
And the sheriff was under a tremendous amount of scrutiny of how he was handling the case. The people, they want that murderer found quickly, although they do protect their own.
Yeah.
They wanted to see justice for her, and authorities, they want to get this case solved quickly, and they thought that it would be solved quickly. But they had so many leads coming in, more were coming in than they could sift through quickly, and so it was very time-consuming for them to try to track down every false lead.
Right.
And even though those townspeople will protect their own, there were a lot of people there who were not insiders as well, like Danny Barber. He wasn't from Manio.
Okay.
He was there for the show as well.
So, and there were probably also a lot of like accusations being hurled.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, anytime there's like a sensational case, everybody comes out of the woodwork with
Sure.
with their story, their allegation, what they heard, what they saw.
Yeah.
They're tracking down all the leads. For instance, they did go back to speak to the roommate, Rodney Brett, once again. Remember, after he had been questioned the first time, he had left town for a few days?
Yes.
Well, that seemed a bit suspicious to authorities. His story mostly stayed the same, but this time he did add something to his story. He said that conversation between him and Danny, when Danny said that she had been up in his room,
Yeah.
and he had denied sleeping with Brenda. He told Brett, you might not believe it, but we didn't sleep together. And then Brett told him he knew they did because he heard them. And then apparently Danny got angry with Brett about that.
Okay.
So that was a little something to be looked
Yeah.
into. And when they asked Brett, the authorities asked Brett, why had you left town? He explained his car was skipping badly. It sounded like it was going to blow up any minute. And so he had gone to visit his family to discuss trading it in. But remember, somebody had heard a car having car trouble that night.
Oh, and he's accusing
He's in the house.
Danny.
He's in the house where she was at. Rodney Brett was there as well. Remember, he was asleep.
Yes. Okay.
And he had car trouble.
Mm.
But they didn't really have a motive for him. Like, what would have his motive?
Well, if he was sexually assaulting her, if he was setting up an alibi, like, yeah, I know you slept with her, but really it was him.
Well, there's a problem with that theory.
Oh, okay.
Rodney Brett was a homosexual.
Oh, yep. Big problem. Okay.
So they tossed around the theory that,
I thought he went to see his girlfriend.
no, that was the other roommate, Earl.
Oh, gotcha.
Earl, which we're going to talk about Earl later.
Okay.
But this is Rodney. And you know,
Okay.
the girls would come to the house for the parties and he would dance with them. He was, yeah.
But he
was
wasn't
just friends.
interested in them. Okay.
He was just friends with them. He was not interested. At that time, the authorities still trying to find a motive. Like, what could he have had as a motive?
Oh, maybe he was in love with Danny.
Oh, I don't know if they thought about that motive. That
Yeah.
never came up. You are a sleuth. That probably would have been a better motive than what they came up with.
Oh, okay.
You want to know? This is what they tossed around. That perhaps Rodney Brett hated women and had attacked Brenda when he saw her leaving that night because he just had something against women in general.
Okay, I mean, that sounds like a bad motive, but I literally just heard a story where that happened and that was the motive. No sexual assault, just brutally killing women.
Oh, interesting.
And, yeah.
Okay, well, they didn't think of that because they dismissed him as a suspect as well.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
A lot
I'm
of
going to
people
tell that story later. So,
a lot of people thought that they were just homophobic. They didn't use that term back then,
yeah.
like we have it today. But some people thought they were just picking on him because he was gay.
Okay. So was he like openly gay, or it just kind of came out during this investigation?
I believe he was openly gay because
Okay.
they did say that, you're on this island where like you've got this performance and people are coming in from everywhere, like New York and everywhere.
Okay.
It's like a artsy area
Sure.
and everything is more acceptable there.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Now a new suspect comes up
Okay.
by the name of David Whaley. He turns up on the radar. David lived on the island with his mother. They stayed at his grandfather's home on the Sound, and his grandfather was the rector of the Episcopal church nearby. They kind of lived in the moneyed part of town, like more well off.
Okay.
Now, David's still an outsider because he and his mom they were just there staying with the grandfather after a divorce.
All right.
But he wasn't
Gotcha.
really from there. Whaley had reportedly been driving around that area of the Danny Barber's home on that night that Brenda disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
He did actually admit to having driving around and drinking heavily, as was his custom.
Mm.
But he denied seeing or knowing Brenda. The friend who put his name out there as a possible suspect, he said that night, Danny said that he, quote unquote, had to have him a woman before he went to bed that night.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Now, he later denied that he said it, but then he said, or at least I don't remember saying it.
Okay.
But he did acknowledge
They never
he was,
do.
right. He acknowledged he was drinking heavily. So he also had been having car trouble that in the days leading up to that. Actually, on July the 4th, a few days afterwards, his drive shaft had actually fallen out, and he had to have that car towed to a garage, which is what he told authorities. The authorities went to that garage and they vacuumed his car for evidence. They collected everything they could find, and they found blonde hairs in the back of that car, in the back seat.
Oh, wow. Not looking good.
No, but when Whaley was confronted with that, he was kind of cool about it. He said, well, I loaned my car to a friend previously to take his girlfriend home, and she has blonde hair. And the friend actually backed that up and said, yeah, I did borrow the car, and I did have my blonde-headed girlfriend in there.
Okay.
They tested the hairs, and the hairs came back as a possible match, but they couldn't pinpoint that it was her hair.
Okay.
Maybe the technology wasn't there in 1967 for
Sure.
that. And that friend that had also told him about David Whaley, he was actually mentally challenged. He later claimed that he had been harassed by the chief of police and that he just gave some statements to get him off his back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and Whaley, he was adamant. He had nothing to do with the murder. And he even said, I'll take a lie detector test. He offered.
So he wasn't really
He didn't seem
suspicious.
suspicious when they, I mean, there were some possibilities, but he just didn't seem like a strong possible suspect.
Okay.
There wasn't enough information there to hold him, so they
Right.
couldn't arrest him. But they did caution him, don't leave town for the time
Yeah.
being. Another person that came forward with allegations was a lady by the name of Lola Barnett. She was a white lady who was an alcoholic, and she was living with her black boyfriend at the time. And again, this is the 60s in the South,
Right.
and that was frowned upon. Her boyfriend was named John Langston Daniels. Lola Barnett, she actually is pointing her finger at two suspects, two black men. One of them is her lover.
Oh, wow.
The other is an acquaintance.
Okay.
But her story was crazy. Let me tell you what she said.
Okay.
On the night of June 30th, she and her boyfriend, John Langston Daniels, had been drinking as usual. They also were heavy drinkers, and she was an admitted alcoholic. And they had gone to bed, only to be awakened around 2:30 or 3 a.m. when a blue and white station wagon pulled up next to their window and honked the horn, like their bedroom window.
Huh.
She said Daniels then got up and went outside. She looked out and saw an acquaintance by the name of John Scarborough in the driver's seat with another male in the passenger seat. And then she saw her boyfriend get in the back seat and lie down with what she thought was a woman. She couldn't tell whether the woman was white or black. But when he came back into the house, she said there were 3 splotches of blood on his underwear that had not been there before.
Either he's guilty or she's like a jealous lover.
Something like that, right? or maybe there's something else
Or
going
she's
on
crazy
with her.
as that, yeah.
Deputies went and picked up John Scarborough for questioning. And of course, he's adamantly denying all
Right.
of that. He actually denied even being there. He's like, I never went to their house. He denied knowing her And then they finally pinned him down and he admitted, well, I know who she is, but I was not there at their house.
Okay.
However, he did admit that he had been drinking that night after having been dry for the past 10 months.
Okay, wait a second. This is who she says is her boyfriend?
No, this is the other
The
guy.
friend that
the
pulled
acquaintance.
up. Okay.
They haven't picked up her boyfriend yet.
Okay.
They're going to. So he says he had been dry for 10 months. And so this night when he was drinking with a male relative that he had with him, the alcohol hit him kind of quick and hard because he had been dried out.
Yeah.
And so he drank heavily and had a memory gap. So he denied being there, but he also said, I don't really know what I was doing between 4 a.m. and 7:30.
Oh, goodness.
He didn't know. So they picked up her boyfriend, John Daniels, and they bring them in together to question them. They're hoping that they can play them against each other and one of them's going to inform on the other.
Sure.
Daniels, her boyfriend, does say, admit it, you were at my house. And he's saying, no, I wasn't.
Oh, wow.
Scarborough continued to deny Lola's story. And then he pushed the detectives to give him a lie detector test. He says, give me a lie detector, inspect my car, do whatever you have to do to prove that I wasn't there that night. So he felt pretty confident.
Yeah.
The detectives did follow all the leads on the two suspects. And what they found was that Lola Barnett's story was full of holes. Lots of things she had told them when they went back and questioned people she had, told about.
Yeah.
It was just, it couldn't have been the way she described it.
Was she crazy?
Well, her brother said she was a bad drunk and she was prone to hallucinations when she was drinking.
Okay.
Then, weirdly enough, they got word from Lola, that some bloody clothes taken from Scarborough's station wagon could be found in her boyfriend's house in a hole in his bedroom floor that had a coffin type thing underneath.
Oh, okay.
Okay. They arrive at John Daniels' house. They want to search.
I bet they do, yeah.
And he invites them in and says, yeah, you can do a search. He didn't even ask for a search warrant. You want to guess what they found?
What?
They did find the coffin box.
Okay.
And inside it, they found a nude and very drunk Lola Barnett.
Huh? What? What in the world?
So you tell me, was she just crazy or was she a drunk or was she both?
Yeah, probably both. Wow.
That was the most bizarre
Yeah.
suspect story in the whole thing. No other evidence turned up against these two suspects. And so they finally said, okay, we've got nothing on you. We can't hold you. They kind of dismissed them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing lined up with her story. She obviously wasn't credible.
She needed to be committed.
And she, was. I'm like, well, I don't know why she was laying in that box under the floorboard of the house, naked and drunk.
That is so weird.
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, it's funny. So now they've been following all these false leads that sound promising at first, and then they
Yeah.
follow them and like, oh, that turns out to be nothing. So they return to their best lead, the person who saw Brenda last, Danny Barber. They bring him in for questioning again. And this time, he maintains his same story, but then he adds a few more details.
Mm.
He mentioned that he and Brenda that night had discussed her date with Rob Breeze the week before.
Okay.
And this was the quote from Danny, a partial quote. And he says they had discussed, quote, about him going to bed with her, about the rough treatment. It was very repulsive and it had changed her outlook on life, unquote.
Mm. So, like, she might have been suicidal?
I think that sounds like she might have been date raped.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It does sound like that.
And then she was just so, devastated by that.
Right.
And apparently confided in him. If
Okay.
what he is saying is true.
Right.
Now, again, he's their prime suspect. Maybe
Yeah.
he's going to maybe he date raped her and was trying to put it off on the person she was with the night before. But she had told Renee Raines that date had not gone well and she was avoiding him. And she actually told Renee that she was a horrible person.
Oh.
Which sounds like she had been date raped because
really
she's feeling like
does.
she's at fault. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that lends some credibility to Danny's story.
Yeah. I think so.
I mean, I really do.
You see, this just reminds me of why it's so important for cops not to get tunnel vision. Because you see, they could have really got carried away with any one of these suspects.
Absolutely. So you have such an intuition because my very next paragraph says, investigators really felt Danny Barber was their man,
Mm-hmm.
that they just needed to prove it. And some people feel that they had tunnel vision because
wow.
of that. Some people feel like they were glossing over every other important person of interest because they were so focused on it being Danny.
Mm.
And so, yeah, you are very good at thinking ahead and having that intuition.
I should have been a cop.
You should have. An investigator. But this is the next best thing.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe even better.
Yes, it is better because I don't have to do the scary work of like going to.
Yes, and seeing all. I mean, it's one thing to sit here and describe those things, but to actually be there and see these bodies,
That would be devastating.
That would be devastating.
It
I
would.
couldn't handle that.
No.
Now we have one other very important person of interest.
Okay.
I'm going to introduce him to this story. Dr. Linus Edwards. He was the Manio resident dentist. He had married a widowed woman by the name of Dottie, who had 2 children. And almost as soon as they were married, their relationship turned violent and abusive.
Mm.
He was crazy jealous, possessive. All the while, he's the one that's kind of like the philanderer and cheating.
Okay.
He was having a fling with another woman. He had been reported intoxicated on the night of the disappearance, which was not uncommon for him. It seems like everybody in this story is a heavy drinker.
Yeah. They must have drank a lot on.
Yeah.
Is it Manio?
Yeah, on
Okay.
Manio. That's right. But some neighbors had overheard him making threats toward Dottie that evening during an argument. I'm assuming, like, you're out there at the beach. Like, a lot of people have their windows open.
Yeah.
And so they hear stuff. He had, in fact, gone searching for his wife that night after the argument. And she fit the description of Brenda. They both had the same hairstyle and color, hair that was dyed blonde. Dottie was about 4 inches taller than Brenda, but both of them would be considered tall, 5'7" and 5'11".
Okay.
And they were both very slender built. And so the theory goes on this one that Dr. Edwards and Dottie had fought after he drank heavily. Dottie left the house after an argument. He went looking for her, saw Brenda on the road and mistook her for Dottie.
When she was walking home?
When she was walking home.
Okay.
And he did admit he went looking for her. And he was in the vicinity of Danny Barber's house.
Was his car making weird noise?
His car was not. But you remember the name Earl Mearis, the other roommate of Danny's?
Yes.
He was also a workmate of Dottie's.
Okay.
And they were good friends.
Yeah.
And Dr. Edwards was very jealous of that relationship. So when she left the house and he's jealous and possessive, he goes driving around looking for her over in the neighborhood.
That area, like trying to prove she was cheating on him with probably that guy.
Something like that.
Okay.
And funny enough, she actually had gone to Earl's house. She had gone to Earl's house, but Earl was not there. Remember, he had gone to see his girlfriend.
Yes.
So she grabbed a beer out of the fridge, left him a note on the table for him and Rodney because she knew him, and left. Okay. So she actually had gone by the house that night.
Was she young?
No.
Were they young? Okay.
No, they were a little, I mean, she wasn't older, but I would think she was probably in her 30s at that point.
All right.
I mean, that is young, but I'm saying not like these were 19 and 20-year-old kids.
So she was a little older.
She was a little older. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But she looked young, and they said, she had a really good personality too.
She was friend.
She was a little flirty.
Oh, gotcha.
But not in that kind of way. She was more like she was just happy-go-lucky and friendly to everybody, and maybe could be a little on the flirty side, but not like you would. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and maybe they were just attracted to her because she was fun. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And she was an island insider.
Okay.
She lived there, was from there. Her family was from there. Dr. Edwards was not. The theory was that when Brenda was walking home in his drunken state, Dr. Edwards mistook Brenda for Dottie, grabbed her, attacked her, and killed her, and then drove up to the highest point of the Croatan Sound Bridge and dumped her body over. And then her body drifted, and then they found her in the Albemarle Sound.
Mm.
That was kind of the working theory. Sheriff Cahoon did inform the SBI of that information, but he also told them he didn't think Dottie would want to talk to him about it. And mysteriously, they focused their efforts on the other suspects, and they left Dr. Edwards alone for the time being.
Probably because he's a doctor.
Probably. There were some who wondered if that may have been due to Sheriff Cahoon being friends with Edwards.
Okay.
Now, other people said, well, they're not friends. Sheriff Cahoon's like that cordial with everybody, but other people said, no, they're friends, and that's why he's not focusing on him.
All right.
There were further implications that Edwards may have had something to do with it, so Sheriff Cahoon was forced to go check them out eventually. He was contacted by those neighbors of Edwards and Dottie, and it was another doctor. It was an optometrist by the name of Dr. Stoutenberg. He and his wife had overheard that argument and those threats, and the next day, which was a Saturday afternoon, they saw Dr. Edwards' mistress at his house, and she came over and spoke to them. She told him that the doctor was acting nervous and upset, and he was talking of closing up shop and leaving Manio. And then she got nervous and said, well, I probably said too much. So Dr. Stoutenberg was really suspicious of Dr. Edwards, and he was willing to talk with agents, but he wanted to do it secretly because he said he was well aware of Edwards' propensity toward violence when he was angered.
Wow.
So he was kind of a little bit scared, like he didn't want him to know
a loose cannon.
He didn't want him to know it was him. Okay. One Friday in August, and that was about a month after Brenda's body was found, Dr. Edwards shows up at the sheriff's office. He had been drinking, he was being belligerent, and he was demanding to speak to the sheriff. When Sheriff Cahoon came out, Edwards immediately starts telling him he didn't have anything to do with killing this girl. That day that he was out looking for Dottie, because he had told him he had been out looking for her, he said that was the wrong date. Your investigators got the wrong date. It wasn't Friday night that I was out. It was Saturday night.
Okay.
And so it wasn't me. He said, I know the rumor came from your office that it was me. And he said, you're ruining my business and my marriage. So he wanted them to knock it off.
I think he had a hand in his marriage, ruining his marriage.
You think he might have had some part in that? The sheriff says, that rumor didn't come from our office, but we have heard it. Mm-hmm. So the sheriff sent him home. He said, go home and just, don't worry about it. The sheriff followed him out and he realized he was too drunk to drive. So the sheriff drove him home. And later told the FBI agents that on the way home, Edwards had been congenial and didn't have anything else to say about the case. Now, do you find it odd that the guy just changes his alibi the night in the alibi?
Right.
Accuses them of getting the date wrong, and he doesn't further question any of that. He just takes him home. And maybe it's because he was drunk, but that's a little weird.
That is weird. And probably it's weird that he didn't say anything else about it if he was so belligerent about it.
Yeah.
Just minutes earlier.
Exactly. So it does seem that maybe there was a little tunnel vision going on.
Mm-hmm.
It would appear maybe.
Right.
Dr. Edwards also had a son-in-law from, I guess, his previous marriage.
Okay.
His name was Bill Watson Jr. Mm-hmm. He really felt like Dr. Edwards had done it. And
really?
He was working behind the scenes to try to get authorities to pay attention to him.
Really?
He was. And since he had come forward and that information was shared, and along with the neighbors' allegations, some people just thought, wait a minute, he's not being investigated enough. You're getting information given to you, and you're not really following up on it that closely, like you have with everybody else.
Yeah.
It was now mid-August. No one had been arrested. The FBI decides to administer a series of polygraph tests to various suspects. Rodney Brett, Earl Mearis, both of the roommates, David Whaley, and John Scarborough all took one. And each one of those came back as no deception was detected.
Okay.
And two of those, remember, David Whaley and John Scarborough both said, I'll take a lie detector.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, Danny Barber also took one. And, quote, deception was detected on the test on relevant questions. That was in the SBI notes. But no further details were given. They didn't tell which questions. And again, if they had tunnel vision...
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
Plus, we already know that polygraph tests are notoriously, I think they're only 87% accurate.
Yeah. And if he was nervous.
Well, and some people said, I'm going to get to this later about Dr. Edwards taking a polygraph. When Dr. Edwards went in and was being belligerent that day in the sheriff's office, he agreed to take a polygraph. And people were like, yeah, if you're drunk, you're going to pass it because you don't even know what you were doing that night. You're just going to say, and they felt like he could pass a polygraph just because of his drunken state.
Okay.
Like he wasn't stressed or nervous because, he's drunk.
He's drunk, yeah.
And so they're not really, honestly, if I was ever a suspect in a murder, I wouldn't take a polygraph.
Oh, I wouldn't either.
I feel like I would be so nervous I would fail it regardless of telling the truth.
I would never take one.
I wouldn't either. And then they don't really allow those very often because of that. I mean, they're just not as reliable.
I think they use them more as a tactic.
Yeah. But I'm willing to bet in the 1960s, that was probably a big thing. They probably thought, oh, polygraph, but I think now we know that that's not reliable. Mm-mm. I kept coming back to this guy named Rob Breeze.
Okay.
I kept thinking, why didn't they investigate that one more? Because she had confided in somebody about that date.
Yeah.
And then Danny Barber's story had added something in there about them, maybe indicating that she had been date raped. And so I'm thinking, why didn't they search him? I couldn't find any information. Since she had that trauma, in her genital area, and that was pretty significant trauma, but her clothes weren't torn away. It does make you wonder, okay, she wasn't raped, but maybe she had been raped prior to that.
Right.
I mean, you just don't know. And we're never going to know. What we do know is that the FBI did not press Rob Breeze on those suspicious details. From what was found, they said that he had an airtight alibi. But they didn't say what that was, and I couldn't find anywhere what that was.
Wow.
But he was released as a suspect.
Was he an insider?
I'm not really sure. I don't remember reading one way or the other. At this point, almost all the suspects have been ruled out except for Danny Barber and Dr. Edwards. Danny was their prime suspect, although many in the case didn't believe he had anything to do with it. Many of the people in the Lost Colony show didn't think he had anything to do with it.
Did he get to keep his job and keep working?
He actually did finish his show, but then he went back.
Okay.
Yeah, I think by August, when the show was over, he left.
He left, okay.
Mm-hmm. The investigators were really pursuing that angle, not so much the dentist one. And public sentiment against the dentist was actually growing now. Things started coming out about his violent tendencies.
Did his wife stay by his side? And
they actually ended up getting divorced. And I will go into that in a minute.
Okay.
So there were also tales of him, Dr. Edwards, severely beating one of his lover's brothers.
Good gracious.
There was a previous suicide attempt that he had made when he was a younger man, that he had drunken blackouts. So the FBI agents, they decided they were going to speak to him again, and they did, and he gave a formal statement. However, once again, they failed to question him about any of the allegations that were made against him by the neighbors or his son-in-law or any other witnesses.
Wow.
He did at that point take a polygraph test, and the agent conducting the test then stated that in his opinion, Dr. Edwards had nothing to do with the murder of Brenda Joyce Holland.
But did he pass the polygraph?
That's what I'm wondering, because in all of the other ones, the quote was, no evidence of deception was detected. In this one, the wording was, in my opinion, Dr. Edwards had nothing to do with the murder.
That's interesting.
I know. I'm thinking that does not sound professional.
No.
Soon after that, they just eliminated him as a suspect altogether.
Wow.
No matter, the case at that point came to a standstill. With two main suspects, and now they've eliminated one of those, all their leads are exhausted, and there's just not enough evidence to arrest either of them. And so the case went cold. Now we're going to move ahead to 1971. So that was 1967.
Okay.
So it's almost 4 years
since
Brenda had been murdered. No one had been arrested. The talk had kind of died down.
Her poor parents.
Can you imagine? And I did read that Shotgun, when he went back home, it drove him. I mean, he was already a heavy drinker because of the war and the PTSD, but that changed him dramatically, as it would any parent.
Anybody.
And he just, really got lost in his drinking and always had murder on his mind because he wanted whoever had killed his little girl. He thought it was Danny Barber. And I will talk about that a little bit more at the end as well. So it's 1971. 4 years have gone by since Brenda has been murdered. Life in Manio kind of goes back to normal. People are moving on. It's kind of getting forgotten a little bit. Dr. Edwards and Dottie had divorced the year before. They divorced in 1970. Valentine's Day of 71, Dr. Edwards is at home alone. Earlier, he had stopped by a friend's house to leave a set of dentures on the table that he had ordered. This friend was the local general practitioner doctor, W.H. Harvey. He had not been home But, back then, you got your friends, you just go on in, leave
Yeah.
something on the table for him. He didn't have his door locked. And then he came home. At around 6 p.m., Dr. Edwards made 3 phone calls. He called Dr. Harvey and asked him to come to his home. He called his attorney, Dwight Wheelis, and requested for him to come to his home. And he called the sheriff's office and requested them to come over.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Harvey didn't get his call because he wasn't home. And Attorney Wheelis, he couldn't come right away because his wife was sick and he was trying to put his young children to bed. He said, I'll come over afterwards.
Okay.
And nobody knows why the sheriff's office didn't respond. Wheelis did get there about an hour later, and he found Dr. Edwards lying in a pool of blood with a gunshot wound to his head, his pistol nearby.
Wow.
Wheelis immediately contacted the sheriff's office and sent for an ambulance. Dr. Edwards didn't die immediately. He hung on for 2 days before he did pass away on February 16th, 1971, from a suicide.
Wow. Was he coherent during those 2 days?
They didn't say that he had made any comments. Some people were thinking maybe he had invited them over to make a confession before he killed himself. Other people say, well, he didn't leave a note. People were hoping, well, maybe he left a note confessing to it. He didn't do either of those things. Some people think, oh, he did that because he felt so guilty and couldn't live with himself.
Mm-hmm.
And some people think that he was calling them over there to deny it, to say one last time, declare his innocence before he killed himself. And then some people think, well, he only used a .22 caliber pistol. He wasn't really wanting to kill himself. He was wanting them to, it was like a cry for help. He was wanting them to come over and find him before he actually died.
Where did he shoot himself at?
In the head. Well, it didn't kill him immediately.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I probably will not put this in. So my dad died the same way from a gunshot wound to the head, self-inflicted. And he didn't die immediately either. Some people think if it's in the head, you're going to die immediately.
Yeah.
He didn't. He actually lived for 8 days. So that doesn't always happen.
Right.
So that rumor mill was going. People suspecting. Some people even said, well, he did leave a suicide note. He left 2 of them. And one was a confession. But officials denied that. They were like, no, there were no notes. And then some, how stories get bigger and bigger. And so now the story, some people are like, oh, he didn't commit suicide. He was murdered.
Okay.
But that wasn't the case either. It did stir up more suspicion about his possible guilt, but not in the mind of Sheriff Cahoon. He continued to dismiss the possibility of Edward's guilt. The case, after he died, they really just dropped the case at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. Danny Barber, he went on to become a bigwig at Sara Lee Hosiery in Winston-Salem.
Really?
He did. Many other of the suspects, they moved on with their life. And many of them passed away, either by accidents or just tragedies happening or sicknesses. Like almost all of those people died like at a young age. I don't want to say young, but not an old age.
Yeah.
And the case was forgotten, except for from the family of Brenda Holland. They're never going to forget. And her murder did take its toll on each of them in its own way. I've already described her dad and her, threw her mom into just a horrible depression. Her brother says he never got over it. It was, it just took its toll. And then years go by. And then in the 1980s, Dottie Fry ends up speaking about this whole case again in the 80s.
The dentist wife.
The dentist ex-wife.
At the time. Okay.
She actually claimed that Dr. Edwards had many times confessed to her that he killed Brenda.
Oh my goodness.
She said when he was drunk, he would tell her that and then later would recant it. My assumption was almost like I could almost hear him threatening her while he's drunk, like, I'll kill you like I killed her or something like that.
Right.
Like just maybe to be intimidating. He may have confessed it while drunk. I don't necessarily know that that's an admission of guilt, but it certainly does make him look guilty.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, just a horrible person.
Right.
To be threatening if he was using that as a threat. But Dottie really believed he was guilty. And she expressed that she wished that they would clear Danny Barber's name.
Wow.
She also expressed disappointment in Sheriff Cahoon because he wouldn't look closer into the Dr. Edwards angle. And many of the locals agreed with her. One other neighbor who was an attorney said that Edwards had actually told Dottie that she was the reason Brenda had died. And if she had not run away from him that night, that killing wouldn't have happened.
Oh my goodness.
And if that's true, then Dottie very well could have been the one who had died that night had that not happened, which seems all the more tragic to me for Brenda.
It does. Okay, but again, I come back to, why do people wait all these years to come forward with something like that?
And people did want to know that. And the conclusion was that her family was from the island and they were private and they didn't want everybody knowing their business. She didn't want to talk about the spousal abuse. And even after the fact, she just didn't want to bring it all up and have her business out there. But still, that seems, this is the life of an innocent young lady.
Yes.
It seems like you would come forward.
Oof.
And investigators had never shared Dottie's claim with Brenda's family.
Wow.
So they heard the fact that he had confessed, they heard that like third hand from a friend who had read an article stating that. When her family heard that, they were shocked. They were furious. I'm sure they felt betrayed by authorities. And they took very little solace in the fact that if Dr. Edwards had killed himself, that he had paid for it somehow on his own.
Yeah.
Because no.
They wanted to see justice.
Absolutely. Yes, they did. Even today, public opinion is split over who actually committed this horrible crime. This is an unsolved murder. No one was ever arrested for this. Even people in Brenda's own family were divided over their thoughts on the issue. Like I said, her dad's shotgun, he always believed it was Danny Barber and always entertained in the back of his mind going out there and finding Danny and killing him. He didn't, but it ate at him.
Yeah.
But then her sister and her mom came to believe that it was Dr. Edwards. Over the years, your mind changes about stuff and people have their own assumptions of what happened. Let's just compare real quick the evidence against Danny Barber and Dr. Edwards, because it makes your head spin after all of this stuff.
I mean, I have somebody in my mind who I think did it already, but...
Okay, good. I'm going to ask you in just a minute. I'm going to go through this again. So Danny Barber, he was the last person to see her alive. He did change his story a couple of times about that.
The guy said he heard.
The guy said he heard them having sex, even though Danny denied that. And it doesn't make sense that he would fall asleep on a date. Or, I mean, if he did, wouldn't that kind of be a bad date? Like, you're going to just sit here and leave me falling asleep? I mean, I don't know. And leave her to get her own way home?
Yeah.
And according to officials, he did not pass his polygraph.
Right.
But many people didn't believe he could have done it or that he had a motive other than the fact that things got out of hand and he raped her
or he raped her.
And he wanted to keep her quiet. But it didn't look like she had been raped. The clothes weren't torn or anything like that.
But somebody moved her body. So I feel like it would have been easy if it was a bodysuit to snap that back.
You think he could have put them back on? Or that he would? Okay, well, I will say they didn't think that she was raped because they didn't think any rapist would take the time to put her clothes back on. But I do think that you're right. That probably, I mean, if you just tore that away and slid it up, maybe it wouldn't be hard to put it back on.
Right. Especially if it were a body. Yeah.
I also want to note this about that. They never found her blouse that went over the top. But later, not in his first couple of times that he talked to him, Danny said that he had taken her blouse off and he didn't know where it was. He never could tell where that blouse went. Okay, so there's that. Let's look at Dr. Edwards. He was heard threatening Dottie that night in a drunken state. He was in the vicinity where Brenda was walking, by his own admission. According to Dottie, he had confessed it to her several times, and his mistress kind of insinuated to the neighbors that he was wanting to leave town and was really nervous afterwards. He changed his story.
But he could have been nervous because of what had happened with his wife. I mean, something kind of big did happen.
Possibly. My main thing is, and again, I'm not a drunkard, so I don't know. But I was thinking, but really, can you, even in a drunken state, would you not know your wife?
That is really what makes me think, I really don't think I know the popular sentiment is that he did it now, but I don't think he did. I've been drunk before. I mean, let's just be real. And I've never one time not known the person standing in front of me. And I've been so drunk I couldn't stand.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, even though I'm not a drunkard, I have been too. I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah.
And I've never been so drunk that I couldn't tell you who somebody was.
Right. Now, there are people who do get blackout drunk.
Right. That's what I was going to say. So maybe that is possible. I'm just saying I don't have enough experience to say if that's possible.
Same.
But for me, I would be thinking, I don't know.
But he drove a vehicle during this time. You know what I'm saying? Like,
and would have had to have driven with her and thrown her over that bridge.
and right, would have had to have been so coherent that he was able to dispose of her.
And if you're that coherent, then you would know it wasn't your wife.
that it was, yeah.
We'll go into that a little bit more because I'm going to tell you what the author of that book said
Okay.
a little bit later. Don't let me forget to come back to it.
Okay.
Okay. He did change his story, his alibi. In that timeline, he changed it and said, your guys got it wrong. It wasn't Friday night that I was gone. It was Saturday. But when they checked, it really was Friday
Okay.
by several witness accounts.
Right.
He was certainly capable of it. Everybody knew him as a violent person.
Right.
Many people knew his character or they studied the case and they believe he's guilty. Like I said, doctors, lawyers, and even the author. So let's just go ahead and talk about what we said. He feels like, if he saw her from behind and he's drunk and he gets out in a rage and he chokes her
And then
realizes, but he's still got to do something with the body.
yeah.
Like that point, he's still going to have to do something. So that's his thinking that it could be.
He should have been looked at.
He should have been looked at closer.
Yeah.
Now, and then they did say that the polygraph did not leave them of the opinion that he had anything to do with it. But I don't know for how much I trust their opinion on that polygraph.
Right.
Because the wording of it made me a little suspicious that maybe they were just blowing that theory off.
Yeah.
Remember, they said, in my opinion, he had nothing to do with it. And I really don't care what the SBI's opinion is. I want to know what that polygraph result was. No one's ever been arrested for her murder. And so here we are. Who do you think is guilty?
I'm with shotgun. I think it was Danny.
Do you?
Yeah.
I have gone back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel like while Dr. Edwards was capable,
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you. I don't think that he could have been drunk enough not to have known her.
Right.
Unless he did come up behind her. But there was a 4-inch difference in their height.
Yeah. And there are people who I guess are emphatically saying, right,
Yes.
that this, I just don't see there's way more evidence, in my opinion, against the boy.
One of the things about Danny that makes me think is that he immediately said he had taken her home until she called him out. And he's like, oh, that's right.
Yep.
And then he said, I just don't think his story sounds plausible.
Yeah. And then the boy, and he was like, but we didn't have sex. And the guy was like, yeah, you did. I heard you.
Yeah.
And somebody heard her cry. Now, did Danny have a vehicle?
He did have a vehicle.
Okay. And
Well,
somebody
and-
heard her crying out.
Yeah, but speaking of that vehicle, remember his roommate, Rodney Brett, said that he heard the door open and close and somebody leave, and he did not hear a car start. Would sound like Brenda had gotten up and left to walk home.
Right. But with everything else, I mean, I don't know. With all of it together, weighing everything, based on, I would have rather, I guess, the boy been innocent. Like, you know what I mean? Like if I get to choose.
Yeah. Because Dr. Edwards
doctor's
was
just a
such an
bad guy.
unlikable person.
Yeah, but I don't think I could say that he's guilty based on those things, or even I don't think he sounds more guilty. I think some people got carried away on a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, which is easy to do. I mean, we all kind of do.
He should have been looked at closer. But there are people who are terribly mean to people that are close to them, but not other people.
Right.
They're not violent. They're violent to it's sad.
Well, there were other people who claimed he was violent.
Okay.
Even the next door neighbor, Dr. Stoutenberg, said he had seen him at poker games and stuff. And when he was losing, he would be having explosive temper and be mad.
Okay.
And he was afraid for him to know that he had been the one. He didn't want them to know.
Right.
So,
I mean, it sounds like he was a loose cannon, but still, he definitely didn't have a motive. I mean, unless he did, there is a small, but I mean, it's a small, he could have not realized that it was his wife, I guess. Or,
yeah, I mean, that is the theory
that she was his wife, but.
And even Dottie says he told her that.
Yeah, but I don't believe Dottie because she should have came forward earlier.
Yeah, she should have.
You know how I feel about these people who come forward 15, 20 years later. I just don't buy it.
Yeah. It makes them less credible in your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And abused women don't always want to talk about that. And since nobody was arrested and she thought that Dr. Edwards was guilty, if she was afraid of him,
Yeah.
maybe she didn't want to stir that up. And as long as they were not arresting Danny,
Right.
maybe if they had arrested Danny, she may have said, okay, now I got to go forward because can't let this innocent man get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
But since nobody was arrested, maybe she just thought, well, there's no point in coming forward. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Well, it's easy to guess what other people were thinking, but we really don't know.
No, and he did kill himself, but apparently there had been an earlier suicide attempt as well.
Exactly.
And he had a terrible, you know what I mean, these failed marriages. He was violent. He was a drunk.
And it was Valentine's Day the year after he divorced.
Yeah,
Maybe
I mean,
he was like lonely or whatever.
His life fell apart.
Yeah. And his business kind of did suffer, and he lost his mistress.
Yeah.
She didn't stick around.
So,
she might have thought he was guilty too, though. She might have got afraid
people
of him.
probably did. I mean, in all honesty, it probably really did ruin his reputation.
I'm sure.
Or, you know, I guess he had ruined his own.
Yeah.
But the murder allegations probably didn't help his business.
Right. All right. And back to Danny Barber. Remember, he also, they called him in a few different times to talk.
Yes.
It was like the third or fourth time before he actually said, well, they had talked about her date with Rob Breeze.
Right.
And then he throws in that information about the rough sex.
Yeah.
After they found her body.
Yep.
So, battered and bruised and taken advantage of, probably. Maybe he had reason to kind of cast a doubt or closer look at Rob Breeze.
Yeah.
Because she probably had confided, well, I went out with him and that was a horrible date and he's pressuring me for sex or whatever.
Right.
And then if he raped her, then he could maybe make that other guy look guilty. But then that other guy had an airtight alibi.
Right. And if she were raped, she could have even put back on her own clothes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem far-fetched to me that her clothes were put back on.
Yeah.
Somebody took the time, like I said, to carry her somewhere and dump her, or to carry her to the Sound and dump her.
But the biggest question mark I have with that is how he got her to the bridge and dumped her body.
When we used to want to leave our house when we were younger and didn't want our parents to hear our vehicles, we would, put it in drive and
leave
do
the
the old
lights off.
pusheroo. Yeah.
So it is possible.
It
Even though
is.
Rodney Brett's testimony does say, or his, what he told the officers was that he noticed those cars were in their same spot. It doesn't mean they weren't moved, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And there were no eyewitnesses to see her. There were a lot of people saying they traveled that road that night or that street that night, but nobody saw her.
That's true.
So
That's a good point.
I don't know. I'm with Shotgun on this one. I think.
Yeah, I think he eventually changed his mind because his family kept trying to get him to change his mind. But maybe deep down, he just knew.
I just feel like it was Danny.
Well, if it was, it would seem that he got away with it because he went on, to get married. And because, like I said, he became a bigwig at Sarah Lee Hosiery and lived his life. Mm-hmm. So we'll never know.
If he did that, he is a terrible person. So don't take this as I'm trying to excuse it in any way or whatever, or make it better. But it could have been he got carried away sexually.
Yeah. You're just saying it wasn't something, maybe he wasn't premeditated.
He was not necessarily like a serial killer with these violent tendencies, but it happened and he was like, oh crap. And
yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. I mean, there is, again, that doesn't excuse it. If he's guilty,
sure,
then he committed a crime. He should have paid for the crime.
But it would explain why he didn't recommit another murder or something else didn't come out later.
Like why he went on to live his life as normal. Yeah, I got you.
Now, those were some hard times. For hundreds of years, people have been asking the question, what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Well, here at Hard Times and True Crimes, we've got the answer. And as a reward for you telling everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check out Hard Times and True Crimes, we're going to give you the answers. Now, based on scientific fact, mostly the fact that nobody was there when the ships returned 3 years later, the only logical explanation is they all died or moved away. Now, I'm no Scooby-Doo, but I'd say that mystery is solved. Till next time, goodbye.